Well, a new study on picky eating is likely to be a relief to some parents. The researchers found that being especially choosy when it comes to food is largely explained by genetics. The UK study tracked about 4,800 twins born in 2007 until they turned 13. They compared the results of identical and fraternal twins and found genetics mostly accounted for differences in food fussiness. And the link only got stronger as they aged, explaining 60% of variation at 16 months. By age 13, genetics accounted for 84% of the differences in picky eating. Well, to break it all down for us, let's bring in Canada Tonight's medical contributor, Dr. Samir Gupta. Dr. Gupta, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
You too. Yeah,
so let's talk about this study, break it down for us. What did they get into? What did they look at here?
Yeah, so really interesting study. So, food fussiness, and that's the technical or medical term for this for picky eating, it's common. It's a common problem. And so I think the assumption out there is that it has to do with the environment, what foods you're exposed to, the eating environment you're in, what your siblings eat, that kind of thing. But they asked the question, how much of this is actually genetically predetermined? And they did this through a twin study, as you said. And so a twin study is an epidemiologic type of study where they actually look at twins in order to determine how much of a trait or behavior, in this case your eating habits, your pickiness, is determined by your genetics or your nature versus the environment or the nurture around you. And they look at twins who are identical twins versus fraternal twins. We know that those twins are born at the same time into the same environment, so that if the identical twins who share all of their genetics, 100% of their genetics, are different or more picky with their eating or more similar in their pickiness than the fraternal twins who only share about half of their genetics, then we know that genetics play an important role.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about that and what they learned specifically when it comes to the extent genetics play in kids' eating habits.
So really interesting. So a few interesting findings. One is that they monitored this over time. As you said, they measured it at several different time points. And so if you start out more picky, it's not just a phase. You tend to be more picky all the way until your teens.
Right.
That's the bad news. The good news is the more picky you are, the faster you improve in terms of your pickiness. But that trajectory of how picky you are is largely genetically determined. And as you said, at the age of 16 months, about that 60% range of your pickiness is genetically determined. And that goes up to that in the 80s by the time you're 3 and older.
Okay, so how can some of the genetic mechanisms influence something that seems so complex, like eating?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we find this time and time again with these twin studies, that behaviors that we thought were entirely environmental or largely nurture are in fact nature, and lots of theories on why this may happen. Our genetics determine how we perceive food, our sense of smell, taste, sight. Largely, they determine the connections in our brain, how our neurons connect in those neural pathways that determine some of these behaviors. So still early in figuring out how genetics determine something this complex and this late in life, as a teenager. But this is telling us that it is much more nature than nurture, and you're hardwired to have this behavior around pickiness with food.
Right. I really did not like broccoli when I was growing up. I do now, but what's your advice for parents who are trying to navigate this and are worried about their kids being too picky, perhaps?
It's tough. It's good and it's bad. And so, you start off by saying it's good in some ways. I think it's bad in some ways in that you can't do a lot. It's genetically determined. Now, you can do more earlier. So if you're going to intervene, it's at that toddler age of 16 months when the shared environment has relatively more of an impact than at later ages. But at later ages, it becomes more and more genetic, so less and less able to intervene. But on the other hand, it's liberating. This is a huge source of stress and anxiety for parents, and blame and fights, and it's not actually anything they're doing. I mean, it's still their fault because they're genes, but it's not something behavioral that they're doing. And I think that's liberating. And when grandma says, oh, it's karma, your kid's a picky eater, you were a picky eater and you tortured me and your kid's torturing you. Well, she's not entirely wrong. I mean, it's not karma, it's genetics. But this is what we're learning. And so I think for some parents, this will take some of the stress off.
Just real quick, can kids grow out of this if they have the, correct parenting around healthy eating?
Yeah, so I think that, the correct parenting and the changes in the environment are going to be most impactful at that toddler age.
Right.
But what we see from the study is, it improves over time. But even up to the age of 13, if you started off as a picky eater, you tend to be more picky. What happens after that, we don't know.
Okay. Dr. Gupta, thanks. Good to see you.
You too.